Welcome to the Stuck Mic AvCast. My name is Carl Valeri, and I'll be your host today. In today's episode, we discuss how to talk to your mechanic to help improve your maintenance outcomes. You know, we're going to try to look at how we can better describe problems and ask questions to increase the quality of our maintenance experience while reducing the stress of having a broken airplane. But before we begin, a quick shout out to our sponsor. Please visit our sponsor, Stratus Financial, where dreams take flight. Stratus Financial offers loans for pilot training, and they understand your needs because they are pilots. You can find more at stratus.finance. Whether you're financing your dream of flying or simply the process by taking care of your student loans, their efficient, hassle-free funding can connect you to a life of your dreams of becoming a professional pilot sooner than you ever thought possible. To find out more, visit them at stratus.finance. Also, as a sponsor of this podcast, Stratus Financial is giving away scholarships guides, and you can get yours for free using the coupon code STRATUS when you visit StuckMicAvCast.com/free and use that coupon code STRATUS. Well, let's move on to the cruise flight. Well, joining me today are a group of really passionate aviators, and that's Leslie Cauble and James Spearman and Russ Rosleski. Hey, guys, how's it going?
Hey, Carl. Good to be back.
Great, Carl. Good to see you.
Great to be here, Carl.
Well, I think, you know, we have a really good team together now, and I've been so excited about the podcast starting up again and all your feedback. Don't forget, stuckmicavcast@gmail.com if you have any questions about anything that we talk about here today. One of the things that we really want to do in this episode is to help you better have better interactions with your mechanic. And it kind of helps that we do have a mechanic here today, but, you know, regardless, if you're an owner, you probably have had these experiences or have your own way to and style of having to interact with a mechanic. So I think this is really important for somebody to make your life easier as not just an aircraft owner, but also as somebody who's a renter, because it's incredibly important to do certain things when you're talking to your mechanic. So let's get started. I'm going to start us off with the first thing that I think is the best thing to do when you're interacting with your mechanic, and that is describe your problem. And this is so important because there are so many people that describe the solution, not the problem. And I know I've done that, right? It's like, hey, I think this is what's happening, and I think you need to do this. But instead of doing that, just tell them, hey, I think this is broken because the door hinge is off. So that's all you need to do, and just let the mechanic go out there and just start, you know, having him, just take a look at that. So give as much info as you can, right? The other day, actually, was it 2 days ago, had a seat that was broken. It was in the upright position, but it actually had broken backwards. So if you just describe that to your mechanic, say, hey, the seat's broken backwards, that's a really good thing to do. Interestingly, during this process that we were talking about it, there was a person there that was actually saying, well, I think this could fix it. I was like, no, just tell the mechanic that this is what's broken, and that's what you need to do, is just tell them this is broken, and that's it. And that's really, really important.
Yeah, I agree, Carl. We see this. I used to do some accident investigation work, and it was the same kind of thing. If you went in with a preconceived notion, even as the investigator, which is what a mechanic is, right? When they're trying to troubleshoot something, and you go into a preconceived notion of it, the problem was due to this, then you go down that rabbit hole and you spend a lot of time and you're ignoring maybe something else which was just as important, or you may miss the real problem after all. So absolutely, you go to a mechanic, you say the engine's running rough. You don't say, the spark plugs are bad. You don't know. I mean, unless you are a mechanic, obviously, but you go in with your symptoms and let them try to figure out the cause. You don't want them spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars going down your rabbit hole because you gave them the wrong idea of what it might be.
But say you, like James, what do you think of someone describing something that's happening? Like if you say to somebody the aircraft is backfiring, is that better than saying there's a loud noise coming out of the engine?
Yeah, so that is more helpful to me rather than them say, hey, the spark plugs are bad, right? And the slight differences there, they've already kind of tried to troubleshoot it in their head. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of mechanics don't like doing troubleshooting. And so what they heard from you when you said the spark plugs are bad is an approval to do work. And what they're going to go do is change out the spark plugs. They're not going to fix the issue. So it's a subtle change there. I see it a lot too with the Cirruses.
Wow.
That normally they need a fuel system setup every year, anything with a Continental, and that there's all kinds of symptoms with that. Like, hey, the RPM is too high, or it's idling a little bit too high. Well, owners will roll right into it. Needs a fuel system setup. Now the shop should go through all of those, but it now all of a sudden the mechanic has approval to just go do an entire fuel system setup, and and they get a gigantic bill at the end. It's like, whoa, it's like, well, you told me to go do a fuel system setup. I try to probe a little bit just because I'm a pilot as well, and I see it a lot. I'm like, well, can you tell me what's actually happening with it first? Like can we talk about it? Why do you think it needs a fuel system setup, or why do you think I need to go change all of your spark plugs? Because I'm happy to go change all your spark plugs. I just don't know if that'll fix your issue. Like, maybe talk to me about the issue.
That's interesting. I love how you said that, because I've never actually thought of it that way. It's pretty much an approval, isn't it, to go ahead and do the work? So that's a very, very good point. That's for sure. But describing the problem is so important. I don't know, Leslie, have you ever heard some interesting things? And I know you guys had, I think, a maintenance shop at one point.
Yeah, we owned a maintenance shop back in Arkansas, and yeah, we have a lot of stories. But that if you want a good outcome with your aircraft and your maintenance, our aircraft owners out there and mechanics, you need to really think about good communication. And I've seen all different types of communication styles, the good, bad, and the ugly. When we're, I'm not going to diss on any of our clients back in Arkansas, but personalities come into play. But if you want your mechanic to work efficiently for you and, start building that rapport and trust with them, start with the very basics, is even just communication style. I know when we moved from Arkansas to Hawaii, I was used to the way I communicated with my mechanics in Arkansas. When we moved to Maui, I didn't know anybody, and I had to start all over again with a clean slate. So we had two mechanics that we worked with, and I said, listen, my old mechanics, they preferred a phone call or walking into the hangar and talking to them. But do you prefer email or text or a phone call? Or do you want to, one of them said, do not come into my hangar and bother me unless it's an emergency. So I'm like, hey, cool. I'm good with that. The other one, if you sent him an email, it might be 2 weeks before you heard back again. So learning those communication styles, and, back to what James is talking about with the spark plugs, sometimes you need to start with just the basics. Are you having an issue and seeing a problem or hearing a noise or feeling a vibration on the ground or in flight? Sometimes people forget even that part of it. But if you have an engine analyzer in your aircraft, in your panel, maybe a good idea is to download that data and provide it to your mechanic and, for the time span that you saw or heard the issue while you're flying.
So that's some really granular information, Leslie, and I think that's great. In addition to that, we should try as hard as we can, I think, to describe the issue in as much detail as possible. Sometimes I do have there's like a balancing act here. How much do I tell them? Here's a big piece of paper, and if I write a novel, is the mechanic really going to actually read the whole thing? But, is there a time when it is a good idea to write a novel if it's something that's complex, possibly? I mean, James or Leslie, do you have an example? Maybe we're having a lot of information, like written down, might be good.
Well, I don't need to, most owners, especially with like kind of complex airplanes, like let's say a T-34 is kind of a niche airplane. And so the owners generally are really attached to it, and they know all the history, right? And they read all the forums. They're, I don't need to know like, all of the backstory on this one part way back when, and you read on a forum here and there, and then this and that. That's a little bit too much. Just tell me why you are here and you think there's an issue, because I want to solve the problem as quickly as possible for you, get it back in the air. So those are my thoughts there.
Yeah, the T-34, by the way, why'd you mention that? Is that because there might be one behind you?
That's right. Yeah, this one behind me, I don't know how far you want me to go into it, but it was an owner a few years back. He called me. He's like, "Hey man, this thing's been sitting on the field for years and hasn't flown, but like an hour in the prior 5." and can you bring it back to life for me? And I was like, yeah, I'll do that for you. He's like, and then help me sell it. And so I brought it out of annual, and and I've been working on it ever since. I connected the next owner to it, and we both fly it a ton. So this is actually the closest I've ever had engine failure as well. So I've got a lot of long story with this plane.
Well, that's interesting. Save that one for another show. We'll talk about engine failures and partial power failures. But it's really cool. The reason I mention it is for those that are listening right now, most of the people listening to this podcast, don't forget we do have a YouTube channel. You go to Stuck Mike AvCast on YouTube, and you can actually see the aircraft that he's talking about in the background there. And the cowling's off, and you can see most of the aircraft and the engine there. It looks like it's up on stilts too. So
it's in for annual.
Annual. Cool. Awesome. But
Carl, something that, sorry to interrupt, but something that I can remember all of my mechanics really appreciated is maybe not so much, writing a book about all the things and the symptoms that your airplane's having, but actually taking a video or some photographs, at least in flight, of the panel, especially if you're having some kind of noise or something, or even taking your mechanic up on a flight with you if you feel like it's, a safe flight that you can make and maybe a minor issue that's happening. So those are ways that they've been very successful and provided a great outcome for us in the past.
Interestingly, that when you're talking about a video or a picture, sometimes you're not near your mechanic and they're far away, whatever. I think it's helpful. And I've actually emailed my mechanic something and they said, oh, I see. Now I know what the problem is, which kind of made me feel like, did I do a bad job describing what the problem was? Is that why he said that? And that's kind of, where a picture's worth 1,000 words. And I think that's not a good idea to have your mechanic's, email address. That's for sure. Right, James?
Yeah, I would say that's the most efficient way, especially with some sort of like, hey, I had it stumbling, on whatever time. And if you can go to the engine page and take a picture and I see cylinder number 3's dropping off, it's like, okay, so it definitely helps. There's a caveat there. I have had one owner that Leslie mentioned it flying with the owner, and now at most of the planes which I put my pink button in the seat after every annual, so I fly them before we turn it back to the owners. But one owner told me, "Man, this thing's running rough. It's running rough." And once I get up at cruise, it's wanting to cut off on me. And I was like, "Okay." So we kind of did that thing where we're like, "We don't." Everything looks normal. We'll just start with the cheapest stuff and work our way to the most expensive. So we went spark plugs, clean the spark plugs. That didn't fix it. We went change the spark plugs, clean the injectors, and then we just started working our way through. And I was like, and then I'd fly it in between, and I'd be like, man, I don't like. I think it's running great. Like I don't see what you're saying. And I was like, and then he goes and flies at the next flight, and he's like, man, it wants to cut off on me. And I was like, okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go together. We're going together, and I'm gonna see what's going on. And so we get in the plane, and we took off and got up to altitude, and he was trying to run Lena Peak at full wide open throttle. So, so I was like, I was like, okay. So now typically every year I also take my up after my customers up after annual, and I'll run through Rich Peak, Lena Peak with them in the plane because most of them. The instructor really doesn't do a good job of it, in explaining it to them. The instructor is more so, hey, let's keep you alive, not how to get more useful life out of your engine. So, I can't describe how many times I've gotten in the plane where it was just like complete misunderstanding, where I was on one page and he was on the other, and then it took us flying together. And he's like, oh, my God, I've been doing that completely differently. So,
would data have helped in that case?
I suppose it, in that one, we could have pulled the data, but for the most part, I was pulling it in between because I flew it, right? So, to me also, the way he was doing it, when the cylinders, you can't feel the roughness, like if you go up to cruise power and you level off and you lean the engine too far, it's not like multiple cylinders start dropping off. Now, if you keep going, the engine shuts off, right? If you go too lean. But it's not like you see on there that, okay, normally I am looking for one of the cylinders to drop off. or multiple or detonation, one to go high, one to go low, something like that. A difference in manifold, everything staying steady across the board is kind of odd. But you feel it in the seat, right? Like if you go way too lean, you feel it. The engine starts to stumble and the power starts to go down. The power setting was lower. It wasn't at 100% power because he's up at 7,000 feet, and a normally aspirated only put out. It's not going to get 100% power at 8,000 feet anyways. So that was one where I truly think I had to be in the cockpit to see it.
Yeah, or possibly multiple camera angles, but then that's a whole other story.
No, it's okay. Normally I do it with them just as an added benefit to them. I don't. For the most part, if they're coming to me for annuals, I'm not charging them for that flight. So
going back to that whole description of the problem, bringing someone up, obviously that's a great thing, but there are times though I think that brevity is better. And just describing something and saying something, hey, this is what happened, or this is broken, or this handle came off in my hand. That's about all you need to say, especially putting it down on a piece of paper. So there are times when brevity is better than that lengthy discussion on a piece of paper.
I have a joke with my customers. Sorry, and they'll start going into the long-winded book, and I'll say, "Is it no worky?" And they're like, "Yeah, it's no worky." Okay, I got it. Okay, got it.
Well, I love that. Well, as far as describing the problem, I think we've covered a lot. Does anybody else have anything as far as the description? Because I think we've done a fairly good job, but really also using aviation terms, proper aviation terms is important, I find. But if you don't know proper aviation terms, then just use the things that you know. I mean, it's easy for me being Italian, with my hands, I say, this happened, it went up like this, and it broke, and that's kind of easy to do. But for some people, they don't have the ability to do that, or it's hard to put that on a piece of paper. So I think having the ability to write something down in the terms that is important, because if you can't describe something, you just can't. You just go ahead and do the best you can with what you got, and then the mechanic can call you back and say, well, what's this thingamajig? What's that mean? And they can kind of go from there and actually translate what your terminology is. So don't feel bad about writing down, something silly.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that, Carl. The more specific and accurate terms you can give, I mean, if a part or something has a specific name, if you can provide that specific name to them, I think that's very useful. And I try to do that at work and in my other flying, certainly. I mean, it reduces confusion if you know that a certain circuit breaker has a certain name, or a component or something like that. But you're right. If you can't do it, then get the video, get the picture. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Whatever. Get them in the airplane. Whatever it takes to give the mechanic, let them see a real good idea of what exactly is going on. Sometimes it's really hard to build a word picture like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one added point to giving pictures and videos and things like that. The other thing you need to have is trust with your mechanic that they're not really going to share some of this with other people. Because if you're doing something really silly and you show it to your mechanic, and it's a real bonehead maneuver, you don't want your mechanic sharing that on the internet. It's like, can you believe what this guy was doing, my client here? I know it's the motivation for mechanics not to do that, because they're going to lose a lot of clients if they do that. but I think you always have to have that kind of trust. Speaking of trust, the other big part of trust with a mechanic, and this is something that we just have to in life, trust the mechanic. Of course, we got to verify things during our pre-flight, but I think sometimes we do a little bit too much. We try to diagnose the problem, and I think we need to let the mechanic actually diagnose the problem. And micromanaging your mechanic is probably not the best thing to do, because soon you might have a very mad mechanic on you. And so as far as diagnosing the problem, I do, and I will say one thing, I always ask the mechanic, would it be okay if I came along just to see what it looks like? Because it is kind of cool to look at the inside of the engine or whatever it is that's broken if you've never seen something like that before. If they say, I'd rather you not, then just kind of let it alone and let it go. But definitely let the mechanic move forward with a diagnosis. So James, from your perspective, I'd love to hear, because I'm sure you have a lot of examples of this, of people saying, "Hey, listen, this is what you need to do." How do you handle that? By the way, first of all, how do you handle someone trying to tell you what to do as far as maintenance is concerned?
Well, if it's something like where they're trying to troubleshoot the problem for me, and often I do this every day. This is all I do. So normally I'm kind of like, well, why do you think that? Is there something else? And then it kind of leads to a deeper conversation. For the most part, the more micromanaging comes into, I will say, the more frustrating is like, hey, I read this on a forum, right? I want you to do this. And then we can get to, it's like, well, just based off of my experience and me kind of doing this every day, I think it's this. I get what they're saying on the forum, but from my experience, I'm happy to do that for you. Like, I will go ahead and do that. I don't think that's going to fix your problem, though. But you just tell me. And so that's normally the conversation that we'll have. But sometimes, more times than not, they're wanting to kind of live in the shop and watch everything that's going on, and that's where most shops kind of have issues more so. And normally I try to schedule, like, hey, here we'll have the airplane opened at this time. This would be a good time to come by and take a look at things. We'll kind of clear out. Normally, we're trying to keep this shop rolling, and so if you're just standing over watching the mechanics work, it really makes it where it's uncomfortable for everyone in the room. And progress is going to slow down. The plane's not going to get back as fast. So I really try to kind of keep that to as minimum as I can.
One thing I tell people, I wonder if you agree with this, Leslie, too, is that if you're going to let your mechanic diagnose a problem, but you decide you're going to get involved and micromanage that, kind of imagine your mechanic coming to your workplace and standing over your shoulder and watching what you're doing all day while you're doing your job, because that's kind of what you're doing. And I think that's actually would make you very uncomfortable, and I think it would make the mechanic real uncomfortable. So you kind of got to look at it at both perspectives. What do you think about that, Leslie?
I mean, most definitely. I've seen it over and over. And, the mechanics that I've worked with so far have been, maybe with the exception of one, have been very accommodating. And, one of them at our flight school in Maui would just like get giddy at the chance to open up the cowling and pull a student aside and teach them something about it, because he's a CFI himself. He couldn't help himself. But yeah, I've witnessed so many times where somebody will drop off their aircraft, or they'll just drop by during the week to check on it. And next thing you know, they're just literally on the heels of the mechanic, following them, looking over their shoulder, asking questions, maybe not even asking questions about their aircraft, but talking about the sports game that happened last night, or, and a lot of times it's hard to be gentle in your remarks, to have somebody kind of escort them out. But a lot of times, they'll just go ahead and tell you, you need to get out of here so I can work on your airplane so I can get it back to you. But stay in contact. I mean, that is very important. Just make sure you're not bothering the mechanic, and, have those realistic expectations that, it's going to take some time to maybe diagnose, to troubleshoot, and check up on your airplane because you are the owner. Maybe even do some research, and you can always present, data or things that you found on a forum or things that you've Googled or read an article about. I've done that, I'm guilty of that. I've done that many times, and the mechanic can take it or leave it, and they can take your suggestions. And I've had sometimes them say, well, I've never thought about that before, or that's a good idea to let's go down that path and troubleshoot that. Or they may just say, like James said, I've got a lot of experience with this, and I actually think it's this. So, present it and then step out of the way and let them do their job.
So, and you said that, and James said that about the forums. How much more do you see of that, of people saying, "Hey, I saw this online now"? Is that something new, or has it been happening in the past few years? I'd like to get a feel for that.
It happens quite a bit. And normally, like the Sears community has COPA. And then the Beechcraft owners have Beach Talk, T34 Association. They all have these forums. Diamond has a similar one, and normally it's kind of like a gripe fest. They'll hey, I saw this. What does everyone think? And it's like, well, Bob and Shirley did this and that and the other, and then I saw somebody did this. A lot of times there is something good. Like they'll find a unique issue and one person stayed and fix it, right? And then they're like, hey, this guy down in Florida, or hopefully this guy named James Spearman in Sevierville figured it out. Like, and then if you can find good resources to fix complex issues where other shops might be kind of turning them away. Typically, shops try to stay like they just want scheduled maintenance, right? It moves in the shop, out the shop, in the shop, out the shop. So things that start to become complex, they're more so of, okay, we don't have. They may be. I hate to see it, but we don't have time for this anymore. Maybe you should try to find another shop, which is crazy to think about, but I actually see it quite a bit, especially with its Tornado Alley Turbo Cirruses.
Interesting. Wow. This is kind of interesting. It's great feedback. Going back to what Leslie said as far as, having, building that trust and all with your mechanic. One thing that's interesting, I loved hanging around with mechanics. That's one of the things I always wish I had done. And this one maintenance shop I used to hang out at, there was a lady there, and I'd been hanging out for years, and she was a mechanic and was a very, really pretty girl. Like just, could have been a model, right? And the same people would come in and talk to me about their problem. And instead of talking to her, and she'd be sitting right next to me. And it's like, well, you've had this mechanic for all these years. You realize I'm just here just having a soda, right? But they would always describe the situation to me. And I talk to her and say, hey, what do you think? What's the problem here? The point being is that if you're going to go to a mechanic, kind of build that rapport and trust with that mechanic, not with the other people around in the shop. And I know we have our favorites and things like that, but I think a part of that was, I think they had a tough time realizing this young, very attractive lady was working on our airplane, and she was a pretty darn good mechanic. And that's something that I think is really important, is that when we look at a mechanic, no matter what they look like, don't have any preconceived notions about them. I mean, just, cause if you look at James looks like, he's ready to go out and golf or whatever all the time, and doesn't look like he's ever get his hands dirty, but he is. He's always into airplanes, and he's getting his hands dirty, and he works on airplanes. I mean, and that's something that the point being is, never have any preconceived notions about any of your mechanics. You never know. You never know who's going to be the person that can really help you. And even if you've been going them for years, it's like, it just always amazes me. But that's kind of a point I want to make there.
And Carl, when you're building that rapport with your mechanic, donuts help. I'm here to tell you.
Oh, yeah. How about cookies? I bring cookies.
Take them to lunch sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. That is very true. Go ahead, James.
I will say, on the flip side, though, a little bit of perception. Like when you walk into a shop, if you're looking for a good shop, the floor should be clean. It should be tidy and professional. They should be wearing something presentable, right? They should be wearing some sort of uniform across the shop. Like if I have a $1.3 million plane, I am not taking it to some shop where it's just a disaster. So I think you can judge a shop in certain sense off of just their cleanliness and tidiness, right? If they can't even clean up their workspace after it, what level of maintenance am I actually getting? That's kind of targeted, but I kind of am challenging, because I've seen it across the board. But the best shops are clean and tidy. They are.
Yeah, I'm not very good at that, the tidiness kind of thing. If you look behind the camera here, I have all these wires all over the place. And my friend that owns a shop right next door here, he even said that to me. He says, what are you going to do with those wires? I said, I don't know, nothing. Why? It drives him nuts. He has that shop where you could literally eat off the floor. I mean, it just shines. And he is a stickler for everything. And you're right. Sometimes, perception is reality. If someone is neat when they're dressed and also neat in their shop, they're going to be neat when they're working on your engine, and they're not going to leave things behind. So that you're right about that. I think that's incredibly true. Leslie, one of the things that I think were talking about before, and I hopefully didn't cut you off, is that when you are navigating this process with your mechanic, there's going to be that point, and I'd love to hear James' view on this too, is that you're going to this whole estimate type of process, hey, go ahead and do the work if it's less than $3,000 or call me. I mean, what would you suggest, Leslie? And then I'd like to hear from you, James.
Yeah, I mean, the more upfront and the more you can communicate that at the beginning before the cowling is even open, just lay it all on the table. A lot of people don't want to talk about money, but it's going to save you a lot of heartache on both sides of the coin by the end of the job. And, I'll give one example. So in Arkansas at our shop, which I thought was a best practice, was for annuals. Even for a 172, we did flat rate annuals, and that included your inspection, your oil change, some of the basics, and then any discrepancies above and beyond the annual inspection, then you would get charged for that and for the parts and labor. So I get over to Hawaii, and again, it's kind of the wild, wild west out there, but they don't operate like that. So I get the bill for the first annual on one of our 172s, expecting it to be, they didn't do there wasn't a lot of work to be done on it. But I got a bill for, I don't know, it was like $3,500. And I was expecting, about $2,000, maybe $2,500, a little bit over. And so when I got the invoice, it was handwritten on almost like a cashier's ticket thing, handwritten where you rip it out and it's got the carbon copy behind it. And it just said annual. It had a number of hours. Anyway, I got charged by the hour for the annual inspection. And I asked about, is there not a flat rate for this? And they're like, no, it is what it is. You get charged by the hour. And it was like that the whole time that we were there. But I wouldn't have been as shocked if I had communicated that and asked the question, how do you do your billing? How do you charge for your annuals from the very beginning before we even got the work done?
Yeah, I think that's really key. If you're going to shop, and I've worked in a lot of different shops too in the industry. I worked for Sears Aircraft and other local shops. Oftentimes a customer will just bring a plane in and they're just like, hey, fix this issue. Just call me when it's done. And certain shops, some jobs can just kind of explode into something that no one really foresaw, and they put hours and hours and hours because maybe it's a complex issue, and they're only thinking get the plane done, and then it's way more than imagine like a out of the blue $9,000 bill, right? So what in the heck? And so that was one of the things that really helped me early on, because as a shop, I have some customers where there's no bill that would surprise them, right? Like they just run the card, I don't care. But then I have other customers where they want to know itemized invoice on $600. And I get accustomed to a certain level of customer and I'm just, doing it and they flip out, right? Well, they deserve that attention too. And so the best thing that I did was start, just like Leslie said, trying to any job that I possibly can. Some of them you can't. Troubleshooting, there's no way to estimate what could fix a complex issue, but an annual inspection, hey, here's our flat rate, and we do charge this up front. And that includes disassembling the airframe, taking it apart, and I explain exactly what they're getting. And then anything outside of that, it's going to be a stop. We're not doing anything else. And then I'm going to send you a discrepancy list, and then it has estimates for everything that we found. We'll go line by line together. And in my software that we use together, we can go and approve or reject one by one. And once you approve all of them, you'll see the total in the bottom. And then now everybody's clear. This is exactly what you're spending on your annual. Same thing with bigger jobs. I really try to just go ahead and get it out right there, because what's really bad for a shop is when they do the work and then the customer flips out and says they're not paying, right, because they weren't expecting that level of a bill. So it's very risky.
I see, in my past aircraft ownership, and this especially goes maybe to you, James, but Leslie could probably provide some input here too, is you go to a shop that maybe just hands you, like Leslie said, that little cashier handwritten kind of receipt, but you want more. You really want something itemized. And often there's a local mechanic culture kind of, at certain airports, or they've always done it this way, and you may be hesitant or don't want to get into a conflict by saying, hey, you need to break this down for me, possibly. How do you guys, in your experience, kind of handle getting what you want so that you can essentially give the mechanic what so you can help each other? You know what I mean? You don't want that handwritten cashier's receipt. You want, a little more detail, but maybe that's not what they generally do.
For me, it was, Russ, it's been, I'm going to just give Hawaii as an example. Like my previous example with the annual, it's a process, and it's a process to gain that mutual trust and that rapport with your mechanic. So, I could have blown my lid and said, well, this is not the way, we did it back in Arkansas. And, I was, as the office manager, I was the one typing up on a 10-page Word document all the discrepancies and corrective actions. And that's what I expect, from a professional. I could have just gotten really irate with him, but just take a step back, take a deep breath, and just say, okay, thanks. And maybe at a different time, come to them and say, hey, this is my expectation. Maybe your list of demands, but don't call it that. And just say, could you next time the plane's in the shop, do you mind, give me a phone call, even a text message, and say, this is what I found. Or if you would provide me a document or on your invoice, give me like the top 3 things that you found or that you did. Just something to communicate that better. But you've got to be upfront. You've got to be honest. But you've got to take the side of humility as well, because they are the professional. They are the trained mechanic, and maybe you're not. So that does demand some respect. And maybe they're not acting as professional as what you would like them to or what you're used to from another shop. But it's something that maybe you can kind of guide them to a point. And I'll tell you, after a couple of years, things got so much better, and it helped our communication. It helped our rapport, our relationship. And then I didn't have to worry about, a student blowing a tire at 5:00 at the end of the day and them getting upset that they have to change the tire to get the plane back online for the next morning. But they took that with a little bit more grace.
I would say this goes back to the previous one. If you're getting handwritten notes like on invoicing, these are things that I would judge the shop on. Right? Oftentimes, a lot of business owners in aviation, they're good mechanics, good pilots, bad at business, right? So, I would start like, hey, this is odd, right? Like, and it's not really kind of untidy. I would go to a professional shop that has legit invoicing systems, but it's going to cost you more, right? So, but not necessarily the cheapest shop. The one that charges you $600 and gives you a handwritten invoice is the best way to go. It is your life, right? Like I do ask this, like how much is your life worth, right? So cutting corners at every corner in maintenance, may not necessarily be getting you ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we're going to get a little bit of feedback on that one, because I'm sure there's people out there, great mechanics, that still like to do it the old-fashioned way, and I get it. But yeah, I agree. I think if you look at a shop, if they usually have the technologies that are in this century, it's usually something that's
and I'll say for those guys out there, and if they want to up like the tidiness on those level of things, it really doesn't cost that much money. And send me, Carl's posting all this information, call me, email me, and I will help you look like a much more professional shop, even if you're a one-man band, and it doesn't cost that much. It makes a big statement.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you put that out there. And, of course, stuckmikeavcast@gmail.com. We'll forward that on to James if you have a suggestion there or want some suggestions, I should say. Going back to this whole navigating this process of talking to the mechanic, et cetera, and keeping in touch, there's another thing that we haven't really talked about. And I think Russ and I can kind of talk to this because we both have been in this situation. How about the individual like myself who many times gets involved with another partner, and how do you navigate that? I've got a lot of horror stories there, where I had somebody I had a lease back on an aircraft, and all of a sudden the airplane shows up in my hangar with parts everywhere, and I'm like, what happened? And there was a lot of colorful language that was exchanged between the mechanic and myself, telling me to never have my partner ever come into his shop again. So sometimes, we don't realize these things are happening. So I think from a personal management standpoint, and Russ, I don't know if you've had these problems, it's really good sometimes to have just one person go to the maintenance shop and describe it. Obviously, if that one person isn't around, you have somebody else, but have somebody in charge of maintenance if you're in a partnership or something like that. I know, Russ, you also had, I think, a similar situation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, this is all about building a relationship, right? I mean, if one of you is not very relatable, I guess, pick the other one, but not quite the same as you. But I've been in flying clubs and such, and what do you have there? You have one person. You have the maintenance officer or whatever, right? You have one focal point for all issues to the mechanic, because otherwise, in your case, you have two different inputs, two different viewpoints, two different methods of diagnosis. All the stuff we've talked about. You have two of them. Right? If you have 3 or 4 or 5 partners, well, you got 5 different people going to the mechanic. I'm sure, James, no mechanic wants to deal with 5 different owners of the same airplane. So pick one, and hopefully it's your most your best choice. But make it easier for you and more consistent, I think, for the mechanic as well.
Have you ever had that happen, James?
Yeah, so the best partnerships that I've seen, and I've seen all spectrum. That's why I kind of laugh, because I'm replaying the story. I can see like the story that you're talking about, right? Like I've kind of seen it all. But the best ones that I've seen work out, I would encourage anyone that's going to do a partnership with in an airplane or in anything, right? Like, it's serious. I typically see them create an LLC for the airplane. They get one credit card for the LLC, and all the expenses go on the LLC. And they create an operating agreement, and there's one person. Typically, it's the dude with more time. So if it's like, and you want somebody complimentary, right? Like, for a partner, you want somebody that actually has the funds to afford the plane. Typically, by themselves is preferable, but you want to make sure that if something happens, they're able to afford it. But usually, I'll see like a doctor and a business owner, and the business owner is usually way too busy to handle anything, and so the doctor has a little bit more free time, and then so whoever has more time is usually the one that ends up being like the guy. But whoever flies, then they'll start, hey, I had a flat tire out in Reno, or whatever. They'll send it there. But all the invoicing and updates typically will go to one person, and it's the one with more time or more experience or the most ownership in the airplane. So that's typically how I see it. That works the best.
So what are some of the other things? I mean, as far as, communication's concerned, as far as maybe even follow-ups. I mean, you say, hey, here's my plane. I'm going on vacation. See you later. That can be a challenge, couldn't it?
Yes, especially when they have let's say there's 3 and 4 owners, and each one has, they've got some sort of flying schedule, and something drops out, right? And then all of a sudden the plane's at my shop, and he drives to the hangar, and he's like, where the heck is the airplane, right? So, so the communication piece, some of the partnerships do well, like where there's one person, he really does good at informing the rest of them. Some of them I have to kind of put something will happen, and then they'll be like, well, I didn't know about this or whatever. And so then I'll put them in a group thread. So I just treat that as I'm texting an individual.
Another part of this whole process is being available for questions, right? And also, not just that, having logbooks available. One thing that I did, I'd like to hear some feedback from you folks, is if I had a mechanic that I really trusted, and just over time we really trusted each other and all, I gave the mechanic my keys to my hangar, and my logbooks and everything. It made my life so much easier. I'm wondering, and they would actually pull it out of my hangar for me, which I'm sure some shops will or may not do. But Leslie, how about you guys? Did you guys keep logbooks for people, or they normally keep them themselves?
Yeah, we did. And it's something that caused me actually a lot of stress when we were managing the shop. So when we owned that maintenance shop in Arkansas, we bought out a retiring mechanic. We bought out the owner and just kind of kept business going. And when I learned the value, as James was talking about, of the logbooks, we, at that time, when we first started, we probably were keeping a dozen of our customers' logbooks all in the maintenance office. They were in fireproof safes, but slowly over time, through talking to our clients, I would just, encourage them to take them home with them and keep them themselves. And I'll tell you, James is talking about, you never know if a fire or a flood or something's going to happen. It's easy to think that's not going to happen to me. Well, I'll tell you what did happen. In March of 2020, we had a tornado totally demolish our maintenance facility and our flight school back in Arkansas. And they found logbooks and pages of logs as far away as 100 miles away. And so that has just been kind of a mess to clean up. Luckily, through the years, a lot of those customers, most of them, had started keeping the logbooks themselves. But on the flip side of that, when your mechanic needs the logbooks, maybe it's not just at the end when the work is performed and they're ready to give you that logbook entry, but it may be helpful for them to go back through the logbooks to find, maybe this is a previous repair, and they can go back and grab a part number or see what was done when your plane had similar symptoms several years ago. So being able to show up with those logbooks to the hangar and provide them to your mechanic when needed is just going to help expedite your work getting done.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. One of the things too, I think it's important is, as far as logbooks and communicating, is the last thing that we're got to talk about here. And that's, respecting your mechanic's opinion, but also you may want a second opinion. And there's nothing wrong with that, right, Leslie? I mean, sometimes that happens. And so, how do you navigate that process? I mean, have you had that issue, Leslie?
I mean, I wouldn't call it an issue. I mean, as a shop owner, I encouraged it. If somebody we really appreciated our customers who would come to us, consistently for oil changes or tire changes and for their annual inspections. But especially with the annual inspection, I encourage all aircraft owners every 2, maybe 3 years or so, take your aircraft to a different mechanic, a different IA, and have it inspected, because there could be some little thing that your regular mechanic is missing. And it's, nothing to fault them on. It's just like 2 eyes are better than 1, or is it 4 eyes are better than 2? Yeah. So yes, definitely go and get a second opinion if you need to. Now, if you make it a habit of that might get a little annoying to the mechanic and time consuming. And so be a good customer and take advantage of other mechanics around you, maybe get their advice, a second opinion, but do so, I guess, sparingly.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. I've actually been asked by mechanics to go get a second opinion on something, and I think that's a really hats off to the mechanic for doing that. I think that's absolutely terrific. But all good stuff, by the way. This is great information. We have a lot of things that we've gone over here. We've actually had some things that I'm sure that our listeners would suggest too. And if you have suggestions, stuckmikeavcast@gmail.com. That's the easiest way to get in touch with us. Really good conversation here. Let's move on to our picks of the week. I'll start us off here, and this is something we're going to do as a topic for another discussion. We talk about fatigue, hazards, and avoidance. We're going to have that as an upcoming episode. It's a safety meeting that I used to do for years, and it's something that I really find is fascinating. But another thing that's fascinating is that we constantly learn new things about sleep and about fatigue and how to be safe for your flight, that I Am Safe checklist. But sleep is really important. But one of the books that I came across, because I've seen this, and it was suggested by many people that are in the fatigue risk management realm, it's called Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams. And this is an outstanding book. I'm almost done with it, but I really am enjoying the fact that the descriptions that are giving and the research that's been done, it really has informed me on certain things as to why I'm losing my memory, first of all. There's other reasons, age and things like that. But it does describe how important sleep is for memory, but it also describes how important sleep is, to prevent not just fatigue. And there's some obvious things, but there's some things that are very subtle as to when you should sleep. Is it true that we sleep in cycles, the circadian rhythm, and things that, we look at, like if we wake up, why does it take so long for me to wake up? And that's, just the fact that we constantly are moving from a point of wanting more sleep to actually needing more sleep to actually rehabilitating ourselves and getting that extra sleep. It is a constant flux, and where you are in that sleep cycle is incredibly important. This book will help you recognize where you are in that sleep cycle, give you some good advice as to how you can get better sleep. So that's my pick of the week is Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams. By the way, you can find all these links in our picks of the week and all of our previous picks of the week online. So Russ, what is your pick of the week?
Well, it's a little different kind of book than I usually pick, but this one is, and you'll know it right away. Surely You Can't Be Serious: The True Story of Airplane. So it's a pretty recent book, just last few years, just about the making of one of all of our all the pilots' favorite movies, Airplane. There, and it was interesting. Had background on. Every chapter pretty much alternated, whether it was your background on, how they, came up with the idea for the movie or, got funding for the movie and such, alternating with chapters that were, about, problems they had making it or how they did certain scenes or, how they came up with the jive talk and, all these kind of things, just all the, where the inspiration came from all the things. It was just, lots in that movie, lots of stuff going on that and behind the scenes that you would never think of, and it's just crazy. It all came together. I mean, it was not expected to be anywhere near the success that it has turned out to be. So anyway, I thought it was a very, very interesting read, very light, very lighthearted material. But yeah, that's my pick of the week.
Well, as you can tell, it's a different setting here. What happened with the last recording is we weren't able to get James's pick of the week. So I'm back here in studio, as you can tell, here at the Sun and Fun campus. I've changed my location a little bit, but James Spearman has been very gracious to join us again for his pick of the week. So James, what is your pick of the week?
Yeah, Carl, my pick of the week is iconic rides in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. If you want to do something completely epic while you're on vacation, come take a ride in an Icon A5. There's a lake, Douglas Lake, very close by. We're going to go out, do splash and goes, show you the flight characteristics of the airplane, and you are going to love it. I guarantee you it's like nothing you've ever done on a vacation, and I hope to see you here.
Awesome. Hey, can they get their seaplane rating also?
They can.
Absolutely. How long does that take, by the way, before we leave?
There's multiple paths. Most people get it done in about a week.
Okay, cool. So again, the website is?
iconicrides.com.
iconicrides.com. Well, thanks, James, and thanks for stopping by again to get your pick of the week on here. So, Leslie, what is your pick of the week?
My pick of the week is following up on our topic for today, and it's one of my favorite other podcasts. It's the Airplane Owner Maintenance Podcast with our friend Dean Showalter. So this is great, not only for aircraft owners, but even for pilots and student pilots, because he really goes into depth, but not too much over your head. If I can pretty much understand most of his episodes, then anybody can. And for example, one of his most recent episodes was about alternators. What happens, or how do you know if your alternator is starting to go out? Everything that we need to know as student pilots. That's going to be probably a question on your private pilot check ride. But as we're talking today about communicating with your mechanic and things to do and building that trust and that rapport, he has two specific episodes that I want to recommend. The first one is episode 23. And that is some of his top pet peeves, not only of pilots coming into his shop with their aircraft, but also of mechanics. So he goes both ways on that, and really good in a very positive manner. And the other one is episode number 141. And the title of that is Aviate, Navigate, Communicate is Backwards. So his premise of that episode is when you're speaking about aircraft maintenance and communicating with your mechanic, it should be the opposite. It should be communicate first, then navigate the issue and your problem, and then you can go off and aviate.
Absolutely. Boy, I tell you, Dean is such a wonderful person. We got to get him back on the podcast. Really appreciate what he's done with his podcast, and appreciate everything that all the mechanics out there that have been on the internet talking about this issue as far as how to communicate with your mechanic. Some really great stuff. Leslie, thanks so much for that one. I think we definitely have to have him back on here. James, Russ, Leslie, thanks for being here tonight and all your input. I know that some of the people listening will have some other input as to, what they feel feel is a good way to communicate with their mechanic. We'd love to hear back from you. stuckmikeavcast@gmail.com. But most importantly, one thing I'd like to encourage you to do is that I know you're listening to this podcast or watching it on YouTube, and you're trying to keep that passion alive in aviation. You're trying to learn something. I really would encourage you to do something every day to keep that passion moving forward in your aviation life. And you know what? I know that you will appreciate all the wonderful world and aviation love that's out there, and that's one thing we try to do is spread that love here at the Stuck Mike AvCast. Well, we'll talk to you next episode. Safe flying out there.